Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do another round of horror audiobook recommendations. I believe I've done this twice before, so I'm going to have those videos linked down below and in the cards. I've also done a recommendation video for science fiction and fantasy audiobooks, so I'll have those linked. If you're just someone who enjoys audiobooks and don't care about genre, you can definitely check out those as well. I've said before that I listen to a lot of audiobooks and I am fairly picky when it comes to narration, so I'm going to be recommending books that not only have audiobook formats, but in my opinion, these are books that are really enhanced by that narration and really uplifted or added to the reading experience. So hopefully I'll be able to add some new books to your own TBRs, whether these books be rereads for you or new to you, and let's get started. First, let's talk about Devolution by Max Brooks, which follows a group of people that decide to leave the city life behind and go live in a community that is focused on low technology, really getting back to our roots and living in a simpler way. Little do they know that there is possibly the Sasquatch out on the loose. This story is told primarily from the perspective of a young woman who is there, and that person is narrated by Judy, Greer, who of course is the famous and hilarious actress. And then the story is told from multiple other perspectives. Now, this book is from the same person that did World War Z, which I recommended in a previous video. And once again, he is back with a full cast narration. So on top of Judy Greer's performance, you also get multiple other actresses and actors lending their voice, and it really does give you that full performance that so many of us enjoy. I will say that for the most part, all the performances were really good. My least favorite performance, unfortunately, was actually Judy Greer herself, only because she has a very perky voice, which to me didn't entirely fit the role, at least in a horror story. But again, if you just want an experience, if you're someone who really enjoys an audiobook that has a lot of money thrown at it, this is definitely one to check out. Within the story, you get different journal entries that are being told to you from different perspectives, and you also get to hear from scientists and people recounting the events and basically explaining what happened and what is involved with the Sasquatch. I really don't want to get into spoilers here, but in terms of a audiobook, that is definitely one to experience. This is that. I got a chance to listen to it via Libra FM's review program, and it was definitely an enjoyable one for sure. Next, I want to recommend Apocalypse Z by Manuel Lucero, and this is a story that is set in a near future where there is an apocalyptic event. The story starts out with our main character who lives in Spain hearing about some kind of viral outbreak in Russia. Soon things begin to spread and different governments react in different ways, trying to close borders and isolate and quarantine the affected people. And soon enough, it gets to Spain itself, and the main character has to leave his home with his adorable cat and go and find safety. Now, soon enough, and it's not a spoiler to say, you realize that this is actually a zombie outbreak. And so this basically is a really fun piece of zombie fiction. The story is told through a set of journals that are being read by our main character. And I really think that when it comes to journal entries, they just work really well when they're narrated to you. And this whole book is done by one of my favorite narrators who actually does a lot of fantasy, and that is Podehl. And most of you probably are most familiar with his work because he did The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So I was really excited to see his name narrating a horror title. And I just think that he brings a lot of energy to his performances, and you definitely have a lot of humor in this book. If you're a cat lover, this book also has that aspect here. And I really do think that it's a case where a narrator took a honestly fairly average zombie fiction story that goes to all the predictable places, but with his storytelling, it just made it so much more fun and engaging, and definitely the best way to experience this one. This is one I read through Scribd, and of course for all of these books I'll have links to the different audiobook sites listed down below. Next, I want to recommend The Good House by Tiana Reeve-Dew, and this is about a woman who is celebrating July 4th in her family home when something terrible happens, and right at the beginning of the story, again, not a spoiler, she discovers that her teenage son has committed suicide. From there, the story splits into two different timelines, and so one is set in the present day afterwards while this woman is dealing with the grief of losing her son, and then we also get a perspective set in the past by her son son, and you get to find out what events caused him to take his life. And this is really a book you want to go into without knowing too much about it, but I really enjoyed the audiobook experience. It's a fairly long horror book, and I normally don't like my horror books to be this long, but because of the narration, I really found that the book flew by and it didn't feel as long as I expected it to. Now, this story is narrated by Robin Miles, and she did a fantastic job. She's a Black woman herself, so she really gives an own voices narration to an own voices story, which in my opinion is the best possible way. I just felt that she gave not just a really good performance of the mother, because I very much felt her grief in her voice, but she also did a really great part with the son, and I just think that she managed to do a really good teenage boy without having to put on a fake voice. So she did it in a just really good way, and I am just always impressed. Whenever I see her narrating a title, I definitely check it out. Now, I've said in previous videos that I'm not always a fan of authors that decide to narrate their own books. Just because an author might be really talented at writing doesn't always make them a good narrator, but there are always exceptions to the rule, and I actually have a couple in this video that break the rule and do a fantastic job. The first book I want to recommend that is narrated by the author is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. And if you get to listen to the 40th edition of the audiobook, it is just fantastic because again, it's done by him himself, and I definitely recommend checking out the sample. His voice is somehow both soft and gravelly at the same time, and he just sets the tone and atmosphere for this book so well. Now, I think everyone is familiar with this classic story, which follows an actress named Chris who is concerned that her daughter Regan is possibly possessed after playing with a Ouija board, and seeks the help of a priest and the church in order to get her exorcised. And I will just say that the author did such a fantastic voice for the demon, and it was just terrifying. I did get to listen to part of this book at night, and that just enhances the experience so much more. So if you want a really spooky experience, a really scary read, I definitely recommend doing the audiobook experience. Now, this is the book that I originally read in physical form, and then when I went to reread it, I decided to try the audiobook, and it went from being a solid 4-star read to a 5-star all-time favorite book. And I really do think that the performance had a lot to do with that. And I just absolutely love it. At this point, if I'm going to reread it, I'm always going to do the audiobook version because again, I think the author did such an incredible job and really brought his story to a whole new level. I just cannot recommend this one enough on audio. Now, I also want to recommend Coraline by Neil Gaiman, which follows a young girl that is living in a house with her parents. She wanders through a door on the side of her house and ends up finding her other mother and other father who want to keep her and sew buttons on her eyes. This is a very creepy middle grade horror story, and despite being middle grade, trust me, it is legitimately creepy. And if you don't know, Neil Gaiman tends to narrate his own books, and he does a fantastic job. I will say that his narration itself is not terrifying. He doesn't put on the scariest voice. Instead, his voice is very warm and comforting, and he's the kind of person that you would just want to read you bedtime stories at night. He has a beautiful UK accent, and I just adore his performances. So highly recommend him. I've recommended him in my fantasy videos before, but this one definitely is horror. And again, I do think that this book works for all ages, and I really enjoyed it. This book also does include some other sounds, and you get little bits of song and little extra things in the audiobook performance that do enhance it. I'm not always a fan of those extras, but in this case it definitely worked and just added for some really creepy moments. So it's a quick read, very short, and well worth your time. Finally, I want to end the video by recommending The Reaping by Bernard Taylor, and this follows a man who works as an artist. He gets commissioned to go to an old estate and paint the picture of a beautiful young woman. When he gets there, things are just not quite right. Everyone working at the estate just seems a little bit kooky or weird, or just are acting strangely, but nothing is per se wrong, and so we can't really put his finger on it. This is definitely one of those books that you want to go into without knowing too much, so I'm going to leave the synopsis there, and instead I'll talk more about the audiobook experience. This is narrated by a man named Hannibal Hills, and I want to recommend him for those of you that like Neil Gaiman, because I found that this man had a very similar voice and accent. And once again, like Neil Gaiman, I thought that his voice was just very warm and comforting. And that's not always what I'm looking for when I'm going into a horror story, but it works with this one because, again, you know that it's a horror story, you know that something is going to happen, but this book reads very cozy, very deceptively cozy. You know it's not quite right, but you don't know where it's going and you don't know what's going to happen. And so I think that the narration just fits the tone of the story really well, and he just did a fantastic job. So definitely recommend that one. It was a lot of fun, a lot of good surprises. Again, don't read too much into the back of the book, just go in and experience it for yourself. It's also relatively short. I think it runs under 7 hours. So if you're someone who enjoys shorter audiobooks, this is a great one to try out. And again, well worth your time, highly recommend it. And I would love to see more people reading it. So that is it for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you want more recommendations for audiobooks, to click the links down below and watch those other videos. I should have them in a playlist if I'm organized. And also, if you are interested in trying out different audiobook services, I do have links for Scribd and Libro.fm. I don't get any financial commission, but it does allow me to get credit so that I can continue to listen to audiobooks, which means that I can continue to make recommendation videos. So hopefully it's win-win. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror as well as thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy. Also, if you are already subscribed, you can support me by leaving a comment, giving this video a thumbs up, hitting that notification bell, or sharing this video around on sites like Twitter and Reddit. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.